Hello, everybody. So today I have the pleasure of introducing Lisa Stringfellow. And Lisa is the best-selling author of A Comb of Wishes, recently published by Quill Tree Books, a subsidiary of HarperCollins this year in 2022. And I'm excited to announce it's currently #1 on hot new releases on Amazon.com and is an editor's pick on Amazon.com. So well done, Lisa.
Thank you.
So Lisa has a special place in my heart because she was one of the first authors to use Fictionary StoryTeller to edit her novel. And you can imagine how excited I felt when Lisa sent me an email saying A Comb of Wishes has been published. And she was very humble about it. It was just a little note of, going to start my second book. And that was it. Until I poked a little bit and asked her, is that the first book you did in Fictionary? And then it comes out that she's had this incredible success. So it's a bit of a whirlwind for Lisa. And I just want to congratulate you on the success you've had so far.
Thank you so much. It's definitely been a whirlwind, and I'm really excited that the book is out in the world and people are starting to find it. So it's been great.
So I'm going to just show it here, make sure you can. It's really hard to show a book. Hang on. There. Okay, so this is the book. And what I'd like to do right now, I just want to read a little bit of Lisa's bio because it gives a nice summary of who she is and what she's doing. So I'm going to start with that. Lisa Stringfellow writes middle grade fiction and has a not so secret fondness for fantasy with a dark twist. Growing up, she was a voracious reader, and books took her places where her imagination could thrive. She writes for her 12-year-old self, the kid waiting to be the brown-skinned hero of an adventure off saving the world. Lisa's work often reflects her West Indian and Black Southern heritage. Now, here's where it gets super interesting. She received the inaugural Kela Color of Children's Literature Manuscript Award in 2019 for this book. She's also a middle school teacher and lives in Boston, Massachusetts with her children and her 2 bossy cats. So Lisa, let's chat about the book. Why don't you tell us what it's about and what genre is it in so our viewers can have an idea of what you've done.
Yeah, thank you. So here's the book again. So it is middle grade fantasy as the genre, and A Comb of Wishes is about 12-year-old Kela, who's recently lost her mother, and she's grieving, and that process is taking a toll. But one of the things she loves to do is look for sea glass on the beach. And so one day she's on the beach with a friend. They're looking for sea glass, and she hears this mysterious humming sound off in the distance that her friend can't hear, and so she's not quite sure what's going on, but she follows it, and it leads her to a place where she finds a box. And in this box, when she's eventually able to open it, is a beautiful hair comb, like the one in the picture. And it connects her with a rather dangerous mermaid named Ophidia, who wants this comb back because it's hers and it's very important. And so she offers Kela a wish in exchange for the return of her comb. And of course, having lost her mother, there's only one thing Kela would want more than anything else. So she makes that wish to have her mother come back. And that's kind of the initial start. You know, magic always has a cost. There's always a consequence. And so that leads off into other places in the book.
Yeah. So it's, when I was reading it, when it gets to the part where she's making the decision of what to wish for, and the mermaid is trying to tell her there will be a cost and stuff, as a reader, you're sitting there going, I don't think you should do this. Don't do it. Don't do it. You know, of course, what she's going to do. But there's that whole, it's very suspenseful, and there's a lot of tension leading up to, okay, what's going to happen with her. And then the story really starts to move forward. And, it's quite moving and exciting and very visual as well. So I've spent a lot of time in the Bahamas, and I've spent a lot of time also in Aruba. And in Aruba, there's a ton of sea glass. And so I fully understood this whole collecting sea glass and what it feels like to do that just physically. And the descriptions in the book are just amazing on how you actually feel it happening as you're reading it.
Thank you. As you read in my bio, my dad's family is from the West Indies. So he immigrated from Barbados. And I've been a couple of times, but just there's so much of the culture of the islands, just even with my family here in Boston area, where a lot of his cousins and, my grandmother, other family members have come. And so the food and the music and the language and the idioms and all of those things were part of what, surrounded me. And I definitely wanted to incorporate in the book along with the setting, which I just felt like was the natural place to set a story like this.
Yeah. And so did you have to do much research around that, or was it already part of you and part of your family?
I definitely did have to do research. So the book is set on a fictional island called St. Rita, but St. Rita really is Barbados with,
Okay.
some creative license taken to be able to allow me to tell the story. But I definitely did research. But I think there were some parts of the story that, I knew, like, what they would cook and eat and what the music sounded like, and just phrases that I would hear people in my family say that are just part of the dialogue. But I definitely looked up things about, mermaid lore and about sea glass. I mean, even sea glass and what Kela collects wasn't actually the original thing that she collected. She actually collected shells in the first draft. And I had a writer friend in a class that I took point out some of the environmental impacts of shelling, and that got me to think a little bit about, did I want to, encourage that by having that be Kela's hobby in the story? And so sea glass, as I kind of mentioned in the book, is really trash in a way. It's things that humans have kind of thrown away. And so that was what I shifted to. But as I did more research, it was actually the perfect thing, because I didn't know until I did the research that sea glass is also known as mermaid's tears. And that was the perfect connection to the story.
Nice. You got to like that reader who was helping you out.
For sure.
Yeah. So tell us about when you won the Quelly Award, and how did that help you in your writer journey? Because obviously you had a full manuscript then when you submitted it. So then what happened?
So I have gone to this conference called the Quelly Color of Children's Literature Conference in New York, and it's really a wonderful place for writers of color to come together. It's almost like an affinity space. And so I had this manuscript at that point that I had been working on, and I submitted it for editor feedback. In conferences, you can also often submit to an editor and have a critique. And so this was the first year that all of the editors who were critiquing work submitted one of the pieces that they had gotten to be judged in this manuscript contest. And so I didn't enter it with the mind of, I'm entering a contest. I just submitted to critique, and the editor who read my work loved it and recommended it. And the conference organizers read it and awarded me that inaugural award. And it was great because it was in partnership with SCBWI. They decided to help partner with that year. And so one of the prizes I received was a full tuition at the summer SCBWI conference in Los Angeles, fully covered travel, all of that, along with also being able to attend one of the writing roundtables with another editor. So I went. That was the first time I'd ever been to that very large conference, met lots of wonderful editors and agents. I met with the editor who had read my piece for Quelly and got to know her. So when we actually were ready to submit, we had people who had read the story and were eager to look at it. So I was agented at that point, but we hadn't gone on submission yet, and so that was just like a lovely something to be able to put in that submission letter and get the attention of more editors. And the book ended up going to auction when we were on submission. I was in a 5-house auction, and HarperCollins was the one that we went with. My editor there is just wonderful, and I felt like understood the story and had the same vision. So Quayle definitely was a huge boost in that process.
Yeah, I'm a big believer in the awards because it does help authors get noticed with the publishers that it's almost like it's already gone through a slush pile if somebody's already picked it out to say this is a really good book. And so I often encourage writers to submit their books to, the good authentic awards. You have to be
Yep.
careful a little bit, but I think it can be something that's really helpful. So when you, at that stage of your journey, the book was still called Dark Tide. So tell us how the transition came and the title was changed to A Comb of Wishes.
So it's funny because my agent and I had brainstormed, and we couldn't come up with a better title, but we knew that eventually when it went to be acquired, that there would be people to help us. The reason we felt like the title ought to change was a couple reasons. One is that it had more of a YA sound than a middle grade sound to just the way in the description. We also didn't feel like it captured very much of kind of the atmosphere of the story. Like, yes, dark tide, but it wasn't like touching on the magic enough. And so there was kind of this wishful, hopeful aspect that I felt like I wanted a title to have. So when we finally went on submission, I finally was acquired by HarperCollins. We had the same conversation again about, my editor felt like, maybe there was a better title. There actually was another book published with the title Dark Tide. So that became another reason to want to change to avoid confusion with a different book. So we came up with a bunch of titles, and I actually polled my students because I'm a classroom teacher. And so I gave my students a Google form with about 5 of the titles. And I was like, okay, let me know what you think of any of these. So it's kind of funny that now that my book is out, some of my students that I had the year that we were doing this said, oh, I remember that poll. And A Comb of Wishes was one of the titles that you asked us about. So I definitely feel like it was a great change and gives more of a sense of what the story is really about.
Sure. And I love that you engaged your students. How nice and how exciting for them to see that, what that tells them, a message to children. I mean, it's fabulous to be reading, but also to be writing. And also you can have one career and have a writing career that you don't have to be one or the other. So you're obviously co-managing being a full-time teacher and being a debut novelist and being out there with the big publisher. So maybe talk to us a little bit about some of the things that are, how is that stretching your time right now?
Yeah, it's been wonderful and exciting, but definitely I'm learning to, kind of figure out this new path that I'm on, kind of doing 2 things at the same time. I think one of those ways is, I'm starting to have requests to, maybe do classroom visits or to speak to schools. And I'm like, well, but I'm also in a school. And so our schedules don't always match up. And so my school has been very supportive and, letting me, kind of manage my time. When I have a planning period, I've done some online panels. I did one yesterday for school librarians where, a virtual panel with some other authors. And so things like that have worked well. I've been able to go to bookstores on my weekends to sign stock, and I'm going to have a reading coming up soon at a local bookstore. So just, being creative with my time and making sure I talk to, my school and making sure everything, we're all working together so that I can continue to do what I love doing, but then also start to connect with readers outside of my school.
Nice. So speaking of connecting, you have an awful lot of really good reviews, and I'd love to hear about how did you go about getting those reviews?
I think a lot of it is part of when you go the traditional publishing route, you have the support of your publisher and a publicist and their marketing department. And so I, definitely have been part of lots of groups over my years of writing communities. And so I've had fellow friends and writers read, and they often will put a Goodreads review up for me. You can copy a review that you have from Goodreads to Amazon or to any of the other booksellers. So I've had friends and writers do those sorts of things. But also just the publisher reaching out to bloggers and to people who might write a piece, the trade reviews. So all of that kind of was pushed by the publisher. So things like my reviews in Booklist or Book Page or Publishers Weekly or Kirkus came through my publisher's support. So a little bit of both. I think, again, I'm in a couple of co-marketing groups, and we, like I said, work together to try to support one another. So I think that's something definitely that authors can do, writers can do for each other. But depending on your publishing journey and if you're traditional or self-published, if you're traditionally published, your publisher really has the biggest impact on getting your book, sending ARCs out, for example, and having your book out there so that people can review it.
Right. And just so for people who don't know, an ARC is an advanced reader's copy. And it goes out to early readers so that when the book is published, the reviews are there on time. So there's a new release and it has already the reviews there. So it's kind of fun to get an advanced reader copy from another author and you get first dibs on reading it.
Yeah, definitely. And I know that there's even ARC sharing groups. I haven't participated with them myself yet, but I have a lot of other middle grade and YA friends who will send to these librarian and educator groups, and they'll send an ARC and the group passes it around among themselves and can do reviews. So there's lots of ways to get the book out there.
Sure. And that's a really good way. And that's a great tip for anyone who's listening. So, what you're going through right now, your success, it's really what most writers dream about. It's a big moment. And of course, me being the CEO of Fictionary, I do want to talk to you about how you edited your manuscript in StoryTeller. You were one of the very first people after we came out who used StoryTeller to actually edit their story from a structural perspective. So a couple of things. One, I'd like to know what your process was. And two, what do you think the most significant change you made because of StoryTeller to your story, if you can remember that far back?
Yeah, no. Well, I can also talk about kind of like one of the reasons I decided to use StoryTeller as well. So being a teacher, one of the things that we'll do in school is think about the structure of a book. And so when we're doing short stories, I'll talk to the students about, you have your exposition and your rising action and your climax and all the elements of, the parts of a story. But I thought it would be nice to look at my story. I'd done so much revision of it, I think up to that point, that I felt like I wanted a big picture, to zoom out and just look at it from further away, and something that was graphical and visual would have been great. And so I remember looking for something that would help me do that, and hadn't found anything until I came across Fictionary. And so I was really excited to put the manuscript in, and then it would kind of show me that plot line that I was used to seeing kind of when we write about a short story, but kind of at that 30-foot view of the story. So that was really helpful. And then it was also really helpful to look at who was in each scene, and where were the characters and what were the events, and to just put it all kind of in one place was really very useful. So that was really wonderful.
Terrific. And when you imported the story, was it a full draft? Did you feel like you had the whole story written at that point?
I did. That was one of the things I learned early on, was that I think a lot of writers do this. We get stuck with a partial manuscript and you keep revising parts of it and it's not finished yet. So I wrote my initial draft in 2013. So a long time ago was the first draft. And I finished my draft in 2014. So then at that point I had a complete manuscript, and then I would, keep tweaking parts of it. And I had critique partners and people who'd help me look at it. But I finally got to the point where I felt like, okay, I've revised lots of pieces. And as I said, I found this piece of software that would help me kind of get a big picture view and just make sure that all the parts were working together. But yeah, I think it really helps to have a full manuscript before you try to do anything structural, because, you really can't know what you need to change until you have a whole story.
Yeah, and that's a really interesting point because you have to, once you have a story or you think you have a story, then you have to look as, is it really a story? Do you have an inciting incident? Do you have a climax? Does it mirror each other? All of those things that are so important to actually having a story. Um, so you did all your work in Fictionary and then you exported it. What was your next step after that in the journey?
Probably at that point, I had a couple of mentorships that I had applied to. And so before I started querying, I still felt like I needed more expert help. And so I know that's a step where some people might look for like an editor that they could hire. But I decided to see if I could apply to some mentorships that sometimes are open, like you'll see them online. So one was Author Mentor Match that I applied to. This was in 2017. And then the other one that I applied to was there was one called Writing in the Margins. So I didn't expect to get into either of them, but I applied. They were both open at the same time. And I got accepted to the first one, which was Writing in the Margins. And I thought, oh, this is great. Let me contact Author Mentor Match and let them know that I have a place, and I'll withdraw my name from the other program. And when I did that, they wrote back and said, oh, well, one of our mentors has already read your submission and really loved it, and she would love to work with you. Like, we don't have a requirement that you can't do any other program but ours. If you would like to, she'd love to work with you. And so I did. So I actually had two mentorships that were running at the same time with two different writers who read my entire manuscript and wrote me editorial letters, was able to email with them, talk with them on the phone. And what was so wonderful about that was that they both had different expertise. So they were both published authors. They both were traditionally published. The one who was through Author Mentor Match, Sarah Ayers, was a YA author, and she was great, gave me wonderful feedback about pacing and the suspenseful atmospheric parts of the book, because that was something that she loved monsters. We talked about monsters and magic and all of that. And then my other mentor was a middle grade author. And so we talked lots about voice and, is this something that a 12-year-old would say, or this how a 12-year-old would think about this situation? And so they really complemented each other and me, helping me with this manuscript and working on all those different aspects of the book. So that was really great.
Yeah. So it's super interesting. So, okay, 2013. You're starting, and then all the way up to 2019 is the award, and 2022 the book comes out. So
yes,
I'm hearing long journey and
yes.
also very collaborative journey, right? There's
Yes.
lots of people involved, and I often hear, oh, writing is very lonely. Well, not really, because of all these things that come around, that you are really connecting with other people and about something that's so from your heart and part of you as it comes out. And it's a very interesting way to be close to other people about, it's intimate in a way because it's your story. And so I love it that you've gone from one step to the next, to the next, to the next, with all these different people helping you get there.
Yeah, it truly is. I feel like that's a stereotype that we hear many times, that, there's the writer in front of their computer with their cup of coffee and they're by themselves just typing away. But it really is a community out there, and people who are all doing the same thing. And you get to be a better writer by interacting with those people, and them giving you feedback when you share your work, and you giving them feedback when they share with you. And I feel like that's how we make our stories stronger, is by, having that interaction. My acknowledgments in the book, I felt like they were going to cut me off because there were so many people that I wanted to thank for their help along the way. So definitely it's a community.
Lovely, lovely. So, okay, so let's talk about what's next. So I know that you've got another book. What stage are you at? Can you tell us a little bit about what it's about? What are you doing?
Yeah. So when my book was acquired by HarperCollins, it was in a 2-book deal. So I have a second manuscript that is going to be published hopefully next year.
Yeah.
depending on it when I get it to them. But it's another standalone middle grade fantasy. And I have a complete draft and I've worked on it for a few, years. I obviously focused so much more time on A Comb of Wishes. So now this is kind of like now that this book is out, turning my attention back to this other story that I've been working on. But I'm just trying to get it into the best shape that I can before I send it to my editor. So that's kind of where I am, and what caused me to reach out to you about Fictionary again, because I thought, I'm kind of at that place again where I would love to have that big picture, 30,000 foot view of the story. There are lots of things that I've changed. I feel like overall, I kind of know I'm happy with how the story's working, but like there's a lot of elements that I just want to think about a little bit more carefully. And I know that there are things that I want to move around and things that need to be developed a little bit more. And so that's kind of my goal at that point, just to get this ready to send off in the next month or so.
Great. And do you have a protagonist, of course? Maybe
I
tell us
do. I do. Well, and so again, I have another 12-year-old girl. This one is, I kind of think about it as like my princess in a tower story. So I love the idea of like fairy tales and folk tales and either reimaginings of the older stories that we all kind of grew up with. So that was where I came to with this story was, what if there was a girl who had to rescue somebody who maybe was, locked up somewhere? How would that story look? But it's set in kind of a desert setting, so it's totally different than the Caribbean, and it's also inspired by West African culture. So very, very different, but also I hope people still see kind of the fairy tale, folk tale type qualities to it.
Terrific. Well, that sounds really good. Now I have to ask you, so you've been through Storyteller once with one book. Is there anything you would do differently now that you're editing your second book?
I don't know if I would do differently, but I feel like getting maybe the manuscript in there to look at what you have is going to be really useful to me. I'm starting to work on that process right now. And so I'm kind of still in that import stage and breaking up the scenes and then starting to evaluate like all of the different pieces that I already have. But I think just giving yourself time to do that. So I think part of what's helpful in the writing process, I've had my students ask me in one of the events that I did where the kids were there for my debut launch, what's something that you tell us to do with our writing that you do too? Kind of like, do you really do the things that you tell us to do, was the gist of the question. And one of those things was to put your writing aside for a little bit and to come back for it. And so like, I think that's part of what's helpful with a piece of software like Fictionary as well. But just anytime that you're in the revision process is you get so close to it. And sometimes you can't see the forest for the trees. And so to step away and then come back. And I think because Fictionary is so visual, I'm really looking forward to like coming back and saying, okay, like, what is it telling me about this story? So.
Terrific. All right. Well, all super interesting. So just before we close, I am going to post the buy links for your book below the video for A Comb of Wishes. You can get it anywhere. I have my copy and it will proudly sit on my shelf. And one thing I would like to say to our listeners, not readers, is when you read this book, please do post a review. That if we all help each other with our books, especially if you're a writer too, you know how important reviews are. So buy the book and then leave a review so we can all help her with her success here. So Lisa, anything you want to leave us with before we close?
No, I appreciate so much you having me on, and I'm excited for, as I said, the book to be out there. It's been great to see it on, sites like Amazon, but I'm also really grateful to the independent bookstores. They've really embraced the book as well. And it's been on some of their indies lists for, indies next. And so hopefully lots more people will get to see it.
Yes. All right. Well, I wish you really super, super success with this beautiful book. And thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me today.
Thank you for having me.